Now, the Pan-South African Language Board has published a report on evaluation of the use of Official Languages Act 12 of 2012. The report looks at the use of languages across various government departments and entities. The assessment is said to have revealed a diverse spectrum of adherence to the UOLA Act across 22 national departments and 18 public entities, also highlighting a pressing need for widespread improvements in policy and planning, even compliance, accessibility of language services, capacity building, public awareness, and monitoring and evaluation. But to take this discussion further, we're going to be joined here in studio by Julius Dantile, the PanSALB Executive Head of Languages. Julius, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on the SABC at this hour.
Afternoon, and afternoon to the viewers. Happy Human Rights Day.
Yes, happy Human Rights Day to you too. It's a befitting topic, obviously, as we assess how far we've come in our 30 years as a nation. And as we explore multilingualism in South Africa on a national department level. I mean, talk to us about the reality in South African context and what this report also aimed to unearth.
Yes, our report is a study of the reports that we received from the national departments and the national public entities. I want to contextualize it in this way. It's not an audit.
Okay.
It is a report and an analysis and evaluation of what has been submitted to us as Pan-South African Language Board. Therefore, we are not going to kind of name and shame.
Okay.
I want to close that.
Because I actually wanted to ask about rights and recourse thereafter.
Exactly. No, we are not there yet.
Okay.
But what we thought of doing was to, in last year, is to look at the annual reporting, how the national government departments are adhering to the Use of Official Languages Act, let alone that the use of Official Languages Act, but also to the Constitution.
Yes.
And we look at 7 areas, like a couple of areas that we said we want to see if whether the language policies are also adhering to this particular act. Remember, this is the Act of Parliament, therefore it has to be complied with. The picture is not as good as we would want to for the 2022-2023, but the projections would tell you that this has been the situation for a long period. This act is, was promulgated in 2012 to give effect for the national government and their public entities to comply with it and provide a minimum of 3 languages on any operation that they are having for government purposes. 3 languages. And we looked at whether this minimum is being met. The reality is that the picture is that that is not met for various reasons, and we have made some findings. So our approach was to utilize a hybrid policy implementation system, where we look at the practical side and also we look at the theoretical side by taking the language policies and looking at the legislation in terms of...
So let's get into that, because obviously it needs to affirm our diversity as a country. And so as we look at the language planning, language policy, the gaps that are still existing at this stage, talk to us about that framework that has been implemented, but also the gaps in terms of implementation. Yes,
our findings include, let me contextualize it also. We received about 24 reports from the national departments. That means there are about 42 departments. And this is an improvement from our side to receive these reports, because before in 2011-2012, we received about 12. And we have made efforts now by reminding the departments individually and also by gazetting. At least we're seeing an improvement that from our side as Pan-South African Language Board, making sure that there are steps that we are taking to remind the departments of their own compliance, by the way.
Yes.
So when we look at the issue of planning and performance, there you find that the situation is not as ideal as we would want to. For one of the factors that you find in the policy themselves. The policy would come very clear and saying, these are the languages that are going to be used by this department. Let me say, for instance, there are 6 of them. You say, wow, good. and it goes in communications, in internal variations and all those things. But immediately at the bottom of that particular policy, you find a clause that says the working language of this department is English. Anyone who wants information in any of the other languages must write and must make an application or a request. Now you transfer the responsibility, being a government department, to provide the information in the language that people prefer. You make them to say, if they cannot speak English, they cannot access that information in English, they must make a request. And that is an indictment. And that is one of our findings, which then creates that the environment is not as ideal as we would want to in terms of the design of the language policies themselves.
So on the back of that, I mean, what's that impact on transformation in South Africa then as a result? Looking at the language attitudes, what are you observing on that front as well? I mean, we also have to look at the capacity building measures that have been put in place or the lack thereof. I wonder how you could unpack that a little bit more for us from your vantage point. Yes,
in terms of the capacity building, the Act is clear with its regulations.
Yeah.
What needs to be done.
Yes.
So the departments must abide by the regulations. What the regulations are saying, there must be a language unit, and the language unit must be capacitated. What then you find is that very few departments have got language units.
Yeah.
Function language unit. When then we were analyzing the language policy, we had a situation whereby you find that they say they have a language unit, but you find that it's only one or two people sitting in one corner somewhere. And that becomes a problem. Because those people are not a language unit in terms of defining a language unit. They cannot provide all the services as much as possible.
Julius, there's a lot to unpack. I have to leave this conversation there for now. Thank you for joining us and for unpacking the report thus far. We're obviously looking at that report that had been unearthed and compliance from national departments, but the gaps that still pervade. I'm going to have to leave that conversation there for now.